Okay. Maria, ready to go.
All right. Well, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who rejoined. Thank you so much for your patience to this very adventurous beginning. Um, I wanted to say welcome everyone to X Minds for our first event of the year. Um, Titled, Does Your Education Team Presume Competence in Your Autistic Child? My name is Maria Ott. I am a member of the X Minds board, as well as the founder and chair of the Non-Speaking Autistic Students Committee. This is indeed one of my favorite topics, and I am beyond delighted to have an incredible group of panelists who will share their remarkable perspectives with you. For this event, we have two sets of panelists. Our first group are autistic self-advocates Lisa Valado, a non-speaking autistic college student at Washington Adventist University, Gordy Bailenson, a non-speaking autistic senior at MCPS, and Tara Vance, founder and CEO of Neuroclastic Inc., a disability rights publication. Our second group of panelists are allies Lisa Mahalik Quinn, special educator and executive director of Reach Every Voice, and Amy Allnut, mother of autistic son and MCPS student Jack, and assistant professor of health and human performance at Marymount University. After each set of panelists completes their presentations, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A with participants. Please place your questions in the chat box and please include to whom your question is directed. Also, please be mindful that several of our panelists today are AAC or augmentative and alternative communication device users, and will appreciate your understanding for any extra time they may need to draft their responses and their devices. And as always, please keep your mute button on at all times with your video off. Before our first set of panelists begins, I have been asked to share my personal journey with my own daughter, Hannah, who is a non-speaker. I personally went over this presentation with her, and she has informed me that she approves of it and that I should not change anything. So let me begin. Like so many parents of non-speakers that I have had the pleasure of speaking to, I had a hunch that Hannah was capable of much more than the public educational system was giving her credit for. I struggled with what I perceived to be a low bar for her and didn't think it was fair that my child was put in a certificate program at the age of 3. Why wasn't this decision being made later once she had a chance to prove her potential a little bit? After Hannah was diagnosed with autism at 3, I found myself one day in a state of great need and desperation. I expressed my deep concerns to a friend about the many contradictory prognoses and overwhelming tasks I was being assigned by Hannah's well-meaning doctors, therapists, and educators. Honestly, I just wanted to sit there and cry. My friend put her hand on my shoulder, looked at me in the eye, and said, "You're going to get 100 instructions from 100 people that think they know Hannah best, but you don't take your cues from them. You take your cues from Hannah, and she will show you the way." This memory has recycled again and again in my mind over the years. Hannah continued in her certificate program at school with genuinely loving teachers who insisted month after month and year after year that teaching Hannah to match items, imitate moving a toy car across a table, and having her point to 5 items day in and day out was the way to go. I saw that there was more going on inside of her than this, but how could I possibly explain this to the quote unquote experts who knew better? So I regularly told cheerful, optimistic anecdotes at IEP meetings, hoping, naively, something would somehow stick and inspire. But after a while, I caught on. Most were not listening to me. They were humoring this poor mother's wishful thinking. Those that did listen and quietly agreed would pull me aside and share those opinions in strict confidence. There was a reason why systemically kiddos like Hannah were being placed in non-diploma bound programs in segregated classrooms. The expectations were low, very low. So we pushed a little harder. Why does Hannah's speech device only have 4 choices on it? What is the communication plan? How is progress being monitored? But the more probing our questions, the more dismissive the responses from the school. Furthermore, our once cheerful Energizer bunny, Hannah, was becoming increasingly listless, tired, and frustrated. And so were her parents. I remembered my friend's advice. Take cues from Hannah. She will show you the way. So we took her out of school. After searching wearilessly for a good option for Hannah, we discovered a teaching methodology that includes, amongst many other things, teaching non-speakers how to spell, which is something the public school was definitely not teaching her, not even close. Well, we tried it out and noticed that Hannah's new teachers were doing something incredibly straightforward. She was 7, and they were treating her like she was 7. Rather than repeatedly having her point to cards to demonstrate pre-kindergarten skills like colors and farm animals, they were speaking in full sentences about age-appropriate topics like volcanoes, dinosaurs, natural habitats, and assumed she understood them. They asked her questions of reasoning and logic and expected her to answer them using choices or spelling out the words or approximations of words. The focus was on getting her brain busy with, actual thinking and exploring, and to becoming an independent communicator. The focus shifted from perceived weaknesses to perceived strengths, from focusing on modifying her behavior to supporting her sensory preferences and motor planning, with the goal of enabling her to express herself fully and to her greatest potential. Competence was being presumed. Hannah was shining. That was our perceived cue from Hannah. Presume competence and watch me shine. Some of the progress was immediate, and some of it was over time. First and foremost, Hannah's listlessness disappeared entirely and instantly, and she seemed freer and happier than ever before. She answered nearly all of 15 questions of reasoning and logic correctly by pointing to a correct response in a set of written choices on her very first day. But this was no miracle. We discovered that Hannah is an auditory learner who had been listening, quietly listening and absorbing so much over the years. Her eye-hand coordination to point to letters on an alphabet board took more time, but we saw improvements in her precision to spell each week. A year and a half later of dedicated, focused work during which presumption of competence never wavers, Hannah is now able to spell many words, unprompted, to communicate her answers, thoughts, opinions, understanding or lack of understanding on most any topic. She has just completed her first piece of creative writing, where she tells us that the heroine of the story is a smart girl who hears everything, including the trees. She is also, we have recently learned, really, really good at math, wowing us with her abilities with fractions and order of operations problems. So this is just a small piece of our personal journey. We recognize that each child is different and will benefit from different support systems, methodologies, etc. In my experience, the common denominator, however, is that presuming non-speakers are learning naturally and have potential, just like anyone else, has often been the missing ingredient. Hannah showed us that she was understanding us all along. We are the ones that were not understanding her. Hannah has taught me so many things, and I consider myself her student. One of the many things she taught me is to extend my cue taking from not just her, but also from the disabilities community at large. And so now we turn to the experts on our first panel, AAC and also non-AAC users who have beautifully and brilliantly overcome so many of the obstacles placed in front of them by an educational system and society that is just not listening enough. May we listen now and begin to take our cues from those who are tirelessly trying to show us that through example, presuming competence is the way. So we begin with our first panelist, Lisa Balado. Thank you.
I am a 24-year-old college student with autism that uses a letterboard to communicate. I enjoy paddleboarding, surfing, snowboarding, hockey, running, traveling, listening to music, and spending time with my sisters. I was born in Brazil and moved to the US with my family when I was 5 years old. We lived in California for 14 years and now we live in Super Spring, Maryland.
After a few years in special education, I started attending a Christian elementary school in second grade. Even though I was fully included, I had adult support, and I was not working at the same level as my peers. I started using the letterboard during my sophomore year in high school and graduated with a diploma in 2015. Shortly after my graduation, my family moved from California to Silver Spring, and I started attending Montgomery College. My college transition was gradual, starting with only one class, and then adding some classes online and some on campus, to finally taking up to 11 credits on campus. I graduated with an associate degree in life science in spring 2019. I am currently taking 15 credits as a full-time junior student at Washington Adventist University, and my goal is to graduate in spring 2022 with a bachelor's in biology. And no, I do not like Zoom meetings. I would instead take classes in person. I hope we will be back on campus in the fall. I am living with my parents while attending school. I was very fortunate to have very supportive teachers during high school who did not question my new way of communicating. Instead, they were very excited to see me participating in their classes like never before. With hard work and their support, I changed my path from certification of completion to a high school diploma. One of my teachers in high school wrote these words in my yearbook: "Lisa, you have been a treasured part of our school family. We have watched you participate in your classes with enthusiasm and joy. You have stepped into a world that is not always comfortable and easy for you. But we have seen you grow and become more comfortable with each challenge. You have taught us not to shrink from challenges and to search for possibilities in every experience. You have also given us a new understanding of the limitless ways of learning and evaluating the learning process. Congratulations on your graduation. You have certainly earned this day." Both my elementary and high school are still embracing inclusion, having several students with autism on their campuses. Life before the letterboard was very confusing and frustrating. People could not find a reliable way for me to demonstrate my intelligence. Life was hard because my test performance was low, and the goals and support were based on the results. It was an ongoing struggle for me, because I felt that people covered my body with all their assumptions, and could no longer see the naked, authentic version of me. They could only see the image they created, with all the layers they added. They saw their version of me, not who I was. However, in the fall of 2012, I went to Austin, Texas, and through pointing to the letters on a stencil, the prison door was open, and the layers started to fall. One time, in one of my chemistry tests at Montgomery College, there was a question that I found an answer different from all the options from the multiple choices. So, I just put a question mark on it. When the professor returned our tests, he said to the class, when I was grading Lisa's test, I saw that she put a question mark, and I decided to review it. I made a mistake, and everyone will get credit for the question. Thank you, Lisa. It felt terrific. I asked one of my professors at Montgomery College to tell me about his experience of having me in his class. This is what he wrote. I'm not sure if you remember, but the first time we met, I told you that this was a completely new experience for me, and what we were going to do is try one thing, and if that didn't work, we would try something else, and so on, until we found something that worked. I know you did not ask about this, but I have some advice for you when dealing with professors that are not familiar with you. One of the first things you did was give me an essay you wrote about yourself for another class. In part of it, you described how you felt when people ignored you. I got so much out of that essay. In particular, one of the things I've always tried to do is to talk directly to you, even if the words were not coming from your mouth, because they were your words. I hope that has helped. So, I might advise sharing that essay with others as well. I've also learned things about the way I teach from working with you that have made me a better instructor. So far, I have not met a professor that was not respectful or unwilling to support me. They all are a little skeptical initially, but once they can see my fingers moving and spelling the answers, their doubts diminish. It also gets easier as you advance in your education, because you paved your way there. I did not have a lot of in-person interactions with my professors at Washington Adventist University. I started classes in January 2020, and in March, the campus closed. Nevertheless, they make sure to leave the chat available, and my classmates often alert professors when they miss my comments.
My journey to college has been a walk with some tears, challenges, failures, but many successes. Every time I walk into my classes, I walk in honor of my friends with autism that did not have this opportunity. I walk to open a path to other girls with disabilities that were labeled as someone not worth investing time and resources to get an education. I walk into a future filled with hope. Last September, I became an American citizen, and I took the citizenship test using my level board and a communication partner. I don't know if I was the first to use a level board to take the test, but they were quite curious about the processes. I also voted for the, the first time. I felt great to have my voice heard. I felt empowered. I am Lisa. Hold my hand when I feel scared. Let it go when I am ready to fly. Talk to me, but not about me. Take that time to listen. Let's learn and grow together. Life is better and more meaningful when we walk alongside each other and build a community of support, acceptance, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was beautiful. And now we turn to our next panelist, Gordy Balinson.
My name is Gordy Balinson. I'm 20 years old. I live in Potomac with my parents. I went to school in the autism program at MCPS. I'm currently finishing my last year at Rockville High School while also taking classes at Montgomery College. While I haven't declared a major yet, my interests are journalism, psychology, and writing. I enjoy going for walks and running on the treadmill. I love to read, and what I love most is watching the Star Wars movies with my caregiver and friend, Danny. I think presuming competence changed my life. Good didn't really enter my world until people finally realized I was competent. I will never forget the first time my parents realized I was smart. I was working with Elizabeth Vossler on a lesson about Mount Vesuvius erupting. I was so excited to tell her everything I knew about it. I was too happy when she asked whether I knew any other volcanoes that have erupted. I answered Mount St. Helens. My parents were really surprised that I knew the name of another volcano. My mom asked how I knew that. I answered that I read it on a magazine cover at the doctor's office. That was the first time I knew that my parents presumed competence. They don't presume competence at school. My parents have hired lawyers and really tried to fight for equal access to the curriculum and the supports I needed to succeed, but they weren't successful. I hate school because they treat me like a baby. People think that I'm not smart because I move my body differently than others do. You see, I have a brain-body disconnect. My brain wants to do something and my body wants to do something else. The result is the drunken baby body that you see. I have a hard time sitting and focusing and typing on demand. I'm not able to type as fast as my mind works. I try to relax my body, but find it hard to do so. The result is that I can't move well the way I desire, so my body looks drunk. This global pandemic and the resulting lockdown has meant that my only outlet to connect with the real world is through a computer. The premise that I have to sit in front of a screen for long periods of time is ludicrous. It is so hard for me. So the teachers at school think I'm dearly impaired. After all the fights my parents had with the IEP team, the school agreed to have a keyboard in the classroom for me, but no one was allowed to hold it. I need a trusted communication partner to hold the keyboard so that I can stay regulated and focused. Looking back on my high school experience, my biggest wish is to have been included in regular classes with a para holding the keyboard. I would have loved the opportunity to have been challenged with a real education. The reason that presuming competence is so important is so that me and my fellow autistics can feel like we are more than vegetables in the classroom. We are thinking, feeling, and truly remarkable humans. People should remove the bias and presume that I am more than just in there. I am competent. The most important piece of advice I would give parents of children on the autism spectrum is to try to do everything you can do for your child. Presume competence, even if it looks like your child is not going to understand. Do your best to expose them to as much as possible. Trust that they are listening. Trust that they are in there. The advice I would give to educators is to presume competence. You try to reach us, but you need to find our preferred method of communication. You also need to open your mind. Just because I scored low on an IQ test does not mean that I have a low IQ. It means that the test was not designed for someone like me with motor deficits. I expect that you might wonder what I will do someday. I have experience speaking at conferences, so I hope to continue my advocacy work, educating and fighting for autistics. My dream is for all autistics to have equal access to education. I don't think that is too much to ask for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordy. That was great. Tara Vance, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So I can't see your chat. So I'm just going to have to hope that everything's okay. And Marie, you can text me if something is going horribly wrong that I need to pay attention to.
Will do.
Um,
You're good.
okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so I am coming at this from a different angle. My name is Tara Vance, and I am the CEO of Neuroclastic. And it's a nonprofit organization. It's primarily a publication that we are somewhat new and expanding our reach and services. But we have approximately 400 autistic contributors from all walks of life and from 6 continents, and ranging from non-speaking autistic teenagers to seniors who were not diagnosed until they were seniors, professors, a few celebrities, and some people living in assisted living or homeless. So we have autistic people in just about every situation you can imagine, creating free resources for the world to help them understand what it means to be autistic. And this is very important because people like me did not figure that out until I was 37. I'm currently 40. I'm an industrial and organizational psychology consultant, and that means I advise businesses on diversity and inclusion. But I was a teacher for 14 years, and so that it just happened that I became very widely known as the teacher who is great for autistic students. People were moving to my district just to have me teach their children, and they would start asking for me years in advance for their kids. And I had no idea that I was autistic or why that happened, but it did. And, but I still had things to learn. I did have a dyslexia diagnosis. I was the last kid in my class to learn to read, years after my classmates, and then later graduated valedictorian. And so that kind of gives you a clue about autistic people developing on their own timelines and maybe being late bloomers or being under accommodated. I was diagnosed with ADHD in my early 20s and everything else in the DSM. So I'm just the neuro cocktail. I'm going to give the fastest lecture that I've ever given, especially since we're running late. So I'm going to skip some things. But this is an important story. So I got the story from my advisor when I was in undergrad to become a teacher. And it was my last year as a student, a college student. And this really profoundly affected me. I've never forgotten it. So one of my advisor and professor's former students had taken a position at the school where he had taught most of his career. He was a former teacher and then principal turned professor. And any new teacher will know that you are going to get the assignments that no one else wants because that's how seniority works in schools generally. And so Miranda was given this class that had retired every teacher they ever had, sometimes cycling through multiple teachers in a year. and they were affectionately known as the class from hell. And so every time someone asked her, though, how are things going, they expected her to not laugh. She seemed way too optimistic. And she just said, I am so lucky. I cannot believe that they gave me this class. And she gushed about how wonderful they were. And then standardized tests came, and there was a rude awakening. She was investigated for cheating because her students had the highest scores in the district. And these kids they all were starting far behind. And when she was investigated, she was indignant. She could not believe that people thought that they had cheated because they were brilliant. She said they're not behavior problems. They're just high energy because they're so brilliant. They're gifted. I came into this knowing they were brilliant. You gave me their IQs at the beginning of the year. And they're kind of looking at each other confused. They don't test for IQ or have that information, maybe on some kids. She had a list of their locker numbers, and she thought that it was their IQ numbers because it said LQ, and she thought it said IQ. And so she thought she had these kids in the 130 to 160 range, but that was just their locker numbers. And so that is your mini course in the presumption of competence there, and just what believing in children from the start can do, because their scores actually were the highest in the district. And she believed that she had this classroom full of geniuses, and they performed as if they were. But I want to tell you about Shemaiah, because she is the student who taught me my most profound learning moment. Shemaiah was in 6th grade when I was teaching 7th, and I used to go, and my planning period was during 6th grade lunch. So I used to go down to the cafeteria and talk to my favorite lunch lady. Often she had just lost her husband, and I don't know, she was just my favorite person there. So, but I would often stop and talk to Shemaiah, who was standing off to the side and crying. And I would ask her what was wrong. She had a severe speech impediment. Sometimes I would ask her what was wrong, and she would try to tell me and then just scream at the top of her lungs. And she was, she didn't seem to understand how to live in her body, and her emotions were huge. I assumed that she was in life skills, which was the program for severely intellectually disabled children. So anyway, she was put in my advanced class, and I went to administration and said, I think there's been a mistake. This student is on the roster of my advanced class. This was the next year at the beginning of 7th grade. And I think somebody misscheduled her, and the principal said, no, she is supposed to be in your class, and gave me no guidance on that whatsoever. And I was intimidated. I did not know how to teach her. I was afraid with her big emotions in a classroom full of 31 children that might be too much. I didn't understand why she was in there, because I presumed incompetence. And then I was working with home office and they wanted to pilot some program that they were working on. And they asked me to collect the core class standardized test scores and find the students who had the highest average out of all their scores. And Shemaiah had the highest of the entire 7th grade. That was humbling for me. I felt terrible, but I had to make adjustments at that point because I had not presumed her competence. So I want to talk about quickly what the presumption of competence does not mean. It does not mean that someone is less disabled. They can still have profound disability, and not acknowledging that they have a disability and that it affects them in many ways. It can be more harmful or as harmful as not presuming that they're competent. It does not mean that they have no need for supports. There's this myth that is probably an American value more than in any other country, that independence and ability are linked, and that independence is the ultimate goal to which we should all strive. That's not what competence means. It does not mean that someone can do everything with no supports. It means that someone needs accommodations and to be able to get to where they need to go. And so I needed accommodations. People have not always been able to hear me speak or to read my writing and understand how profoundly disabled I am. And I am, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But students like Gordy, who had, or like Shemaiah, who had less motor control, might be able to do a lot of things that I've never been able to do, or certainly can't do now. And that is something that we all need to take into account, that it's mainly speech and motor control that makes someone believe someone is more or less capable. Competence doesn't mean that everyone is a hidden genius locked inside a body that can't express that level of genius. Intelligence tests cannot even measure autistic ability. They're not designed for autistic people, and autistic people do not develop on the same timelines or in the same way. And so you have to throw those scores out. They're relatively meaningless. But and it doesn't mean that someone can do every single thing in every single context. It means that you have to adjust the context to fit the learner. And that means challenging your own competence. I've realized with Shemaiah that a lot of my apprehension was that I didn't believe I was capable of teaching her. I didn't know how. And nobody gave me any guidance about that. Nobody could explain to me. And I wanted to ask in very blunt ways, how is this student, who I look at and perceive as being profoundly disabled, able to do these things? She was profoundly disabled. She couldn't tell when she had pulled her shirt up to her neck and her whole midriff was exposed. She didn't know she had done those things. She did that all the time. And that was hard for her, especially because other students laughed at that because it was 7th grade. And my biggest regret is that I did not do better to prepare my classroom to understand and embrace neurodiversity and different types of learners. And I wish that I could go back and fix that, because and not just for Shemaya, but for all of my students, autistic or not, disabled or not. I did not prepare my kids, and nobody told me to. So we have some resources for that we'll get to later. So what presuming competence does mean is to let go of your assumptions about disability and believe that despite whatever stereotype or trope or thing that you believe about a person, let that go. If you think that someone's intelligence and ability to understand you is related to whether or not they can button a shirt, that's not how ability works. That's how you believe it works. That's how I believed it historically, that it worked, and I was wrong. And I wish that someone had told me that before, much earlier in my career. But hopefully I can take that and help others to understand that our assumptions and our biases and our prejudices and our fears about our own competence are really the biggest barriers. Our children are much more resilient and much more capable than we believe we are to teach and support them. So 3 easy steps to begin your journey of presuming competence. Forget everything you know about autism and disability because you've been miseducated. I was miseducated to the extent that I was a literal expert with a graduate education, married to an autistic man that I knew was autistic when I started dating him, and found that a favorable trait, and had all these autistic students. I taught special education. So I had a giant classroom with maybe 17 students who had IEPs at a time, and just a few mainstream students, because that was the only way that they could handle the number of caseload with the level of teachers and get that many kids in my class that have been requesting. So yeah, step 2, don't think of speech or body control as indicators of ability. That those are the obvious things that you first see. And all of human history, we have mistakenly believed that these were always 100% of the time an indication that the mind was as discordant as the body. And the 3rd step is so critical. Learn about autism by engaging with the actually autistic community. And I put actually autistic there because there's a huge difference between the autistic community and the autism community. So you need to consult the actually autistic community. You can hashtag actually autistic. You can search that hashtag and find millions of resources. And I will not go on about the ways that over presumption of competence or not understanding level of disability meant that I was under accommodated. I eventually had to quit I started with teaching 5 periods of the same class. I memorized verbatim the entire book. By the end of each day, I had taught a lesson 5 times. I could still read you the whole book verbatim from my memory. I was accommodating myself using my strengths because I cannot plan. I can't plan. I can't understand time, but by the 5th rehearsal every day, I have mastered, my craft. But every year they started increasing my responsibilities. So I had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They split my reading and writing. So there were 2 different classes. So I had taught 6 different courses. I could not do that. Then they wanted lesson plans written every day. They presumed way too much competence from me. They thought, you're a smart person. You can handle this. And my complaints, I knew I was ADHD. And I told them that I cannot do this. I can't understand time. I can't plan ahead of time. I can't write down all the questions that I need to ask because I'm not going to follow this. I need to be flexible in the moment. I do well by reading the room, listening to my kids and adjusting, but they wanted everything written down for every teacher. I couldn't do it. So I just had to leave the career I loved. If you visit neuroclassic.com, everything on our website is free. Hundreds and hundreds of articles, free downloads. You can contact us. We're Neuroclassic on all social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was excellent. And now we begin our Q&A for our first set of panelists. And our president, Laura Gordon, will take it from here.
Yes, I will. So our first question in the chat was for Lisa, and the question was, how do you approach your teachers, RE being regarding being non-speaking, and how do you let peers at Montgomery County and Washington Adventist College know how they could help you? So we got Lisa went ahead and she typed her response, which I'm going to read to you, to that question. And she says, I send emails to all my professors before classes start each semester. And at some point we meet in their office to further clarify their questions. I let the professors share with the class how I communicate, and they usually are kind and respectful. For some professors, keeping track of my comments in the chat box is easy, but others just ask a student to keep track of the chat. I had several classmates that were my lab partners, and it always worked fine. So that's good. And then we also had a question to both Lisa and Gordy about advice for finding a communication partner. And that's something that has come up in the past at a previous webinar that we did. And I believe, Lisa, you responded that that's something that you are sort of always kind of struggling with and trying to find the right person. And I think it looks like Gordy said the same thing. It's hard to find people to help do this on a regular basis. I'm just trying to see if there's So yeah, Lisa said that was her biggest challenge, and she still struggles with that. So, I don't know how universities work, these days. It's been a while. I don't know, if there's message boards or whatever, or same with high schools. But I don't know, Gordy or Lisa, do you want to elaborate on that at all? Is it just sort of something you kind of lucked out, you feel like, with finding someone who you were able to use as a communication partner, or did you really have to work really, really hard just to find one person to help you out? And if you want to reply in the chat, that makes it easier you can do that. But it does sound like that's something that both Lisa and Gordy struggle with. Another question, and I'll come back to that answer. The question was for Gordy, what helps you stay regulated during the school day? Does it help you to be able to move around during virtual learning instead of sitting? How do you advocate for yourself to your teachers? And Gordy had indicated that he stays regulated by pacing and jumping. He said he sits, but it is hard. And he also indicated that he just wrote a letter to his teacher, to his professor, reminding them of his accommodations. So that was something else. Gordy also got a question about from a parent saying, my 5-year-old just got their first communication device. They're communicating in pictures. What advice do you have for them? And Gordy indicated that learning to spell would be the best advice that he could provide. That would open up the world in a lot more ways. So that was that one. Let me just check the other questions here. Okay, so this one's for Tara. I wonder how autistic people can tackle the issue of knowledge and understanding without being disrespectful to people who are actually intellectually disabled. So Tara, I don't know if you want to do a
Oh yeah,
live answer.
sorry.
Yeah.
I had
okay.
type. I'll just read that. I said it's an excellent question,
Sorry,
and
yeah.
we kind of have to toss unless somebody is in a persistent vegetative state. We presume competence, and we toss our ideas about intellectual disability. I have areas of intellectual disability. My visual spatial IQ is under 100 points below my verbal. And so what that means is a set of steps looks like a painted ramp to me. I trip a lot. I can't tell how far away things are. I get dizzy in busy environments because just the visual overstimulation, and then my auditory processing is so slow. I'm being evaluated for being deaf, even though my hearing is not impaired, which is why I asked for captions today. But my headphones are really good, so I was able to follow along. So we have to just, verbal intelligence is one way to be expressive and to relate, and that won't work for everyone, and not everyone will become a prolific writer. So we find what works, and we continue to work with that person with their enthusiastic consent to figure out a way to educate them and to have them educate us about what works for them. My daughter I was told that she was intellectually disabled profoundly. And then a few months later that she was gifted. The difference was she had started to speak, but she had an autistic speech therapist who said, she's a right brain language learner, and you need to sing everything that you say to her. And we started doing that, and suddenly, she's communicating with us, and she's singing and then speaking. And so, it's just about learning where the person is, and that, you might dance to communicate, you might sign, you find something, and then you just keep working on it until you give them more options for expression.
Yeah, you had mentioned that sort of, and in we had a previous webinar where, it's up to us to try different things, right? And it's up to us to sort of experiment and do what we can to be creative and look for new and different ways to communicate. It's not their problem, it's our problem to solve. And I like that sort of idea. Let me just look at the time here really quick. Sue, Maria, Melissa, I'm just gonna ask if we want to, do you want me to continue with the chat just because we're on a different timeline than what we had expected? Or do you want to save some of these questions for email, move to our ally panel, and then come back to this? I'm just not sure about how we're doing on time here.
I think we should probably move on to the next panel and take care of these questions by email.
Okay, so everyone, I'm saving the chat. I have your chat questions captured. We have asked the panelists if they would be okay replying to chat questions directly via email, and they said yes. So we will do our best to get your questions answered directly via email. And I think now we're going to move on to sort of our next section. I think. So.
Thank you, Laura. So I believe our next panelist, this is our second set of panelists, will be Lisa Mahalik-Quinn.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. It is really nice to be here tonight. I am a former MCPS teacher. I spent about 13 years working in Montgomery County in a variety of capacities. I spent 6 years working in an augmentative and alternative communication program where students were from K to 2, they learned mainly how to use their devices along with academics in primarily a self-contained classroom. And then from 3 to 5, they were included for the full day in their own classrooms with my support and my team's support. And then, 6 years into this program, the county closed the 3 to 5 portion of my program, and I needed to find a new job. This was the time when the county was piloting a facilitated communication pilot program in middle schools. And I took a leap with that. I had, read everything throughout grad school, everywhere else that told me that FC was bad, that supported typing was not real. And I'd seen all the, the Dateline specials. But what I knew on the inside was that my autistic students were really, really smart, and they just didn't have the right way to communicate. And I didn't know that this was the right way. I didn't know if it would be something that was successful, but I thought it would be an interesting challenge, and it would be good to approach it with a little bit of skepticism. So it's coming at this from a background of already understanding that people who don't speak still have a lot to say. And so I spent 2 years in this pilot program, and one of the best thing that came, there were a lot of really good things that came out of it, but I imagine many of you have had some frustrating experiences with working within a large school system, and not having a lot of agency as a teacher or a case manager for a very, very unique program was extremely frustrating. And my students had expressed to me that they needed something in the summer to do that would be engaging and allow them to work on their communication practices. So I created a summer program for them with Reach Every Voice. And that's kind of how we came into existence. And we've evolved over the years to provide a whole different host of things, but it's all been based on need, what our students need, what our community needs. Our community is growing and changing because of the pandemic. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I approach presuming competence, both as an educator in a classroom and then now outside of the classroom, what that looks like. And our moderators had asked us to share maybe an aha moment. I didn't really have an aha moment with presuming competence, I think because I grew up with a friend with cerebral palsy who used a really, I think a misnamed device called a Liberator. It was tricky, it was hard to use. And as a 6th grader, I was the one who was programming it for her speech pathologist who couldn't figure it out. So I've always known that there's more there than just on the surface, but I do work with a lot of people who don't see that. And so the aha moment I'm going to kind of tell you about it opened a lot of other people's eyes. So I've been working with a really, really, really smart young man who was just very frustrated, and he had a device that he would use mainly to request things that he wanted. And he would tell us every day, I want the elevator, I want the elevator, I want the elevator. And like after hearing that for the 900th time, I eventually hid the word elevator for the day, which is probably not a best teaching practice, but it led me to a really good moment where he said, I want stairs computer. I thought, oh my God, look how smart this kid is. And so I thought maybe we can teach him to spell. We can teach him to point to spell what he's thinking and saying. And we did. And people were skeptical. Of course, they saw me holding a stencil with this kid as he's pointing to each letter. And they were like, yeah, okay, what are you doing? But I had an intern who spoke Korean, and this young man's family spoke Korean at home. His grandma and grandpa talked to him in Korean. And so I was holding the stencil with him, and my intern said to him something in Korean, which I don't speak. And my student responded, always. And I was like, oh, okay. So what did you ask him? And he said, I said, do you understand what I'm saying to you? And his response in English was always. So I think that helped people open their eyes. And that's something we have to continue to do as we reframe our previous assumptions and what we thought about competence and autism and non-speakers and intellectual disability and all of that. So we often misjudge students' behaviors when we see them. We see these things happening and we misjudge it as isolation. They don't want to be near me. A lack of motivation. They don't want to do that. Aggression. Well, they're just too aggressive to do this. Or non-compliance. They won't do it. They just won't do it. And in reality, those individuals they're compensating and they're dealing with a body that's experiencing sensory and motor differences, and they cannot effectively communicate them to the world around them. If you imagine that I stuck a piece of duct tape over, if you're a speaking person, if I stuck a piece of duct tape over your mouth right now, I said, all right, from now until Friday, you need to go with this piece of duct tape on your mouth. You may not write to anybody, you may not sign to anybody, this is it, this is your life. How would you be able to manage? How would you approach a situation in which someone asked you a question? What would you do? Or maybe where there's something wrong, you're hurt, or your kid left all his Legos on the stairs and you stepped on them going down and fell. How would you respond if you couldn't use the voice and the words that you have? I'm willing to bet that after a couple unsuccessful attempts to communicate, you'd resort to some pretty interesting behaviors to try to get your point across. So we need to stop assuming that we know the real motivations behind the actions of individuals who have no reliable means to tell us differently. And we need to stop letting that impact how we provide access to an appropriate education. So we talk about the least dangerous assumption. How do we, as an educational team, treat the student? How do our attitudes change? So think about Tara's story when Tara was talking about the teacher with the brilliant class who had assumed that these, students she got were brilliant and the outcome that she got. What happens if a teacher assumes that a student isn't listening? I can tell you from years of experience, if we think our kids aren't going to get it, if we think they're just not paying attention, they just don't care, we treat them differently. And that's something you have to be conscious of all the time. But now, what if you assume that your students are competent, that they are capable? So often our society recognizes that stroke victims might be locked in following a stroke, and they acknowledge that these individuals, they understand everything going on around them, but they don't always have the ability to respond in a way that allows them to show what they know. So what would happen if we extended that understanding to individuals with limited speech or no speech? I would like to say that this is the least dangerous assumption, because we are causing the least amount of harm by presuming that they are actually competent humans. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so Ido Kadar is a non-speaking autistic author who's written 2 books you should read, Ido in Autism Land, which are his experiences as someone who learned later in life to type to communicate, and then Into Worlds, which is actually a novel. So Ido says there are 2 philosophies guiding much of autism theories in education. In one, there's no presumption of competence. Rather, the non-speaking individual is determined to be low functioning intellectually and not properly processing human speech, thus requiring simplified lessons and constant drilling. This is the prevailing theory. Now, I saw this a lot in segregated classrooms and throughout my years in MCPS. I had a really, really frustrating experience where I asked for a copy of some materials I had used at another school. I knew what they were. They were science curriculum adapted with symbols for, for students who were maybe pre-literate or using symbol-based systems. So I knew what I was asking for. I asked for it with a particular student in mind, and someone in central office who did not know my student, who only knew the school where I was teaching and the program I was teaching in, told me that they were obviously inappropriate for my student. Was I a new teacher? Did I need to sign up for the new teacher course online? So when that's the prevailing philosophy that's being supported by the top of a department, it's like constantly swimming upstream with 50-pound weights tied around your ankles when you're trying to make systemic change. So this is where we need to move, right? What Ito says, he says, in the other philosophy, there's a presumption of competence. That is, an intact mind may be buried behind a messed up motor system caused by neurological factors. Therefore, if the person is taught to move properly, to point and spell words, that person may learn to express thoughts and potentially get a more normal education. Many, once thought to be hopeless cases, have proven that, like books, they shouldn't be judged entirely by their cover. So what he's saying is that people need to be taught to move properly. And that's at the core of our misunderstanding about anyone who doesn't speak, particularly autistic students. If we ask a student a question and they point to the wrong answer, let's say we've asked them to point to the word lunch, we assume that they don't know the answer and therefore they need instruction in reading, not that they need instruction in how to take control of their motor skills that are required to slow down their motor systems, get their brain to connect with their body and point to the right word. Like I would ask my students to get my keys off my desk and they might come back with my planner off my desk. That complex motor action might have been too much at the moment. Does it mean they don't know what keys are? Of course not. But it might mean that they weren't able to execute each necessary purposeful action to bring back the correct item. I try and explain this to neurotypical people who drive by talking about stick shift driving. So I learned how to drive stick, which many of you may have. Maybe people don't even do it anymore, but that is a truly complex motor action. And I got in the car, I was, in college, just my boyfriend's car, and I understood in my brain what I needed to do to make the car move. I needed to move one hand, I need to shift the other hand, I need to lift one foot up, push the other foot down. I got it all in my head and I got in the car and nothing happened, right? So I couldn't make this happen. And I looked at my boyfriend and he goes, well, just hit the foot feed. Hit the foot feed, what does that mean, right? I don't know what hit the foot feed means. And so if you looked at me, you would presume she doesn't know how to drive stick shift. She can't do it. She's incapable of this. Couple of months later, I had a friend who's a special education teacher teach me how to drive stick shift. Guess what? We went to a bus loop. She told me exactly where to move my right hand, where to move my left foot, what to do now, what to do next. And she was so calm. She said, we're just going to go from 0 to 1. All we're going to do is go from stop to start. And within an hour, I could drive. So we need to rethink how we are teaching people to move and to move their bodies and to execute these complex motor actions and separate that from what we think about intelligence. So there's this mistaken idea, and Tara touched on it, where people believe that people who talk about presuming competence, that we all believe that kids are all just locked in geniuses. And Maria touched on that in her introduction when she said that about her daughter, she said, we're learning everything she knows and everything she doesn't know. We know what we know and we know what we don't know. A lot of times my students do know so much more than we would suspect because they have spent years listening to everyone talk about them and around them. But there's a lot that they don't know, especially if they've been in a segregated classroom, learning the same repetitive skills day after day for years on end. So instead of assuming that they know everything, I'm assuming they can learn everything. And so we do have no idea what a child's capable of learning unless the information is presented in a way that's accessible to them and they have a reliable way to communicate their understanding. So I talked about how hard systemic change, it's hard to see, it's hard to make happen, but there are really good teachers out there in the county, and individual teachers and individual schools are really good places to start. And often that can help you make the difference in the experience that your child has. So here are some questions for you to use as you guide your approach with the school system. Does my child's team ever talk down to them? Do they use a loud or a slow voice? Or do they talk about my child as if they're not there right in front of them? Does my child's team use age-appropriate language materials? And do they use topics that correlate to my child's interest? Even if my child is 18 and has never been exposed to general education curriculum, they are still 18 and deserve to be treated and respected as an 18-year-old. Does my child's team understand that my child may not always show what they know or what they're thinking? So these are some questions to ask yourself if you're not sure about your team, or if you want a couple ways they can move towards presuming competence. But I do know that, Gordy mentioned wanting to be included and wanting to have a real education, and it can be done. We've seen it done. Lisa Volato is a marvelous example of being able to have been included now and accessing her dreams in college. There are other students who are accessing real, meaningful educations. We've done it, we're doing it, and it should be the case for more students. But the reality is that for so many students, for too many students, it's not happening. And especially with so many kids struggling at home right now with distance learning, we reach every voice. We're getting a lot of messages from parents who just, who say, I just don't know where to start. Like, I don't know what to do. I know they're capable of more. And so we're trying to help. I had asked the presenters about sharing this with you, and they thought it would be a good resource. We're offering a 10-week course that introduces parents to the concepts of how to start adapting age-appropriate, engaging academic materials for students who might not have a reliable communication method. And so if that's something that you're struggling with and you feel like you'd like some help, I would encourage you to reach out to me, or find us on our website and be in touch with us. So that's going to wrap my end of this up, and I'm going to turn things back over to Maria.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was incredibly informative and spot on. And now we turn to Amy Allnut.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Lisa, that was great. I'm Amy Allnut, and I know we are in a time crunch, so I'm really going to condense my what I'm going to present just so we have time for questions. I'm Amy Allnut. Like I said, I have an 18-year-old non-speaking son, Jack, who's autistic. And a little bit about our story. He's my third child. I have two older daughters, and I think having two older daughters allowed me to recognize that maybe something was going on with Jack early on. He was diagnosed at 2. And we were often running into the world of autistic treatments, and we did everything imaginable. And really, I did not have at that time the presumption of competence. I very much assumed he was impaired. I didn't understand the brain-body connection that Lisa just so eloquently explained. I didn't understand his motor movements, and when they would ask him to point to an orange duck, he couldn't do it. So I really assumed he was impaired, and he spent the first 10 years of his life very much misunderstood. Like I said, though, we tried everything and we really got nowhere. We tried sign language with him, that was too hard. We tried all sorts of music therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, years and years and years of speech therapy, and we just kept hitting one roadblock after the next. And finally, a friend of ours went to Soma in Texas, similar to Lisa's experience, and we had our aha there. Up until that point, Jack was just a quiet boy, didn't say any words, who acted out of frustration and probably his inability to communicate his needs to us. And we spent 4 days in Austin, Texas with Soma, and our aha moment was when Jack typed out with Soma after 4 days of practice. He typed out on the stencils, "I am trying and I'm really smart." And at that point, my husband and I looked at each other like, he's in there, and we have no idea what he's like. So it was like meeting him for the first time. So that was when he was 11 years old. He's now 18, he'll be 19 at the end of this month. And our world has transformed as a result of presuming his competence and teaching him to type. Since then, once he learned how to type, we found a group of friends in the area, we live in Montgomery County, who were also typers. And there were 5 boys. They called themselves the Real Boys. And we would meet weekly to type and practice skills. It was a support group for the parents, and it was a support group for the boys. So the boys got to be around other typers and feel supported. And as a result of that, the parents and I, we said, you know what, these boys deserve to be mainstreamed in general education. They are smart. They deserve to be on grade level curriculum. But because of their body control and their motor control, we knew it would be a struggle. So we invited at the time, the superintendent of special education to come to one of our typing sessions, and she did. And it was there that one of the Real Boys, Harry, typed to her, we deserve a real education. And at that point, she took a huge chance on these 5 boys. And she said yes to a pilot program in Montgomery County where the boys were mainstreamed in general education with one-on-one mentors or aides to help them, facilitators. That started when Jack was in 5th grade. And he's a senior now. The program, unfortunately, will not continue when the Real Boys graduate. It has still been a bit of a controversy. I think there's still some hesitation regarding the best practices of the typing technique, that the boys are really typing their own thoughts, that it's authentic. So we continue to struggle with that. I think the county might be feeling a little overwhelmed by the cost associated with the pilot as well. You know, every boy has their own aide, and actually there's a girl involved too. We now have 9 people in the program. So I wanted to touch on that, even though the program is going to be ending when the boys graduate and the girl graduates. I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to tell you that it can happen. They have seen it. There are advocates in the Board of Education who believe in our children, and that we can make change, and we can get these kids the appropriate education that they need. And with groups like Reach Every Voice, we can show others that these children or these kids are in there. They are very, very capable of learning. They have so much to offer. And I hope that within this meeting, some of you will become empowered to fight the good fight. The public school system has seen what our kids can do. And I think it's a shame that it's not going to continue. And I hope that some new advocates will be out there. And now we're currently trying to trail the road to housing for these boys. So that's my next agenda item. So that was just a brief story of Jack and his how he learned to type and the presumption of competence. But I wanted to really make sure we had a chance to answer questions. So I just want to stop there.
Yeah. So Amy, I was just going to ask really quick. Can you just talk briefly about what is SOMA? What were you talking about there?
SOMA is she's in charge of the Halo Clinic in Austin, Texas. She developed the rapid prompting method, and her son Tito is a nonverbal autistic. So she developed the technique with him. Tito's also a published author. So she does camps, 4-day camps for families to learn the technique and help their kids communicate through pointing, through the RPM method, and then ours evolved into typing.
Okay, got it. Either Lisa or Amy, can you just touch on where parents can go? I mean, Lisa, you talked a little bit about the skills building workshop, but where can parents go for, I want my child to learn rapid prompting? Like, where do they start? Like, and how do they know it's the right fit, and what are the other options? Can you just talk about more sort of the nitty gritty stuff that parents probably are wondering about?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Amy, okay. So I see that Anka put in the Halo website onto the chat.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start. There are also there are also certified RPM providers in the area. I'm one of them. Actually, I have a few at my practice at Reach Every Voice. You can find us at reacheveryvoice.org. There are some people in Virginia, so similar to rapid prompting method, spelling to communicate is another method that teaches students how to spell and point and use a letterboard to communicate. You can find information about them at I-ASC, I believe it's .org, but if you Google I-ASC, it will be there. Maria has put a link to the non-speaking autistics page for XMinds. She gathered a really nice list of resources there, including, I know there's some videos of students. One of my students is there. And I would also put you in touch with United for Communication Choice has some good videos, but if you want to get started, I would say working one-on-one with a provider, whether it's in person or virtually right now. But one thing SOMA says that I think is very important is that this is a parent-led method. It cannot just be that your child comes to see me for an hour a week and we have, you know, our time together, they're doing great, and then you go home and don't follow up with it. It's something that everybody has to be on board with because it takes practice. It takes everyone being a team to do this.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Along those lines, Amy, specifically, someone asked about Jack's transition. Did he transition from a letterboard to a keyboard, or does he still use a letter? Like, how does that work for Jack, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, he used the stencils that Soma taught him to use. He started with those where he would put a pencil in. That evolved to a plastic laminated board. In the movie Far From the Tree, which we are part of that movie, you would see a wooden letterboard that he used. So we have transitioned through multiple types of devices. Right now he uses the keyboard, but if we went to the swimming pool, we would bring a laminated board. So he still uses all of those, but it did take some time to transition. The Soma focuses on ABCD across the top, whereas we tend to focus now more on the QWERTY boards, like the actual keyboard. So he's more comfortable using those versus the format of the Soma's letterboards.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
And Lisa, can you talk briefly about, is that a progression that you see with, does it always happen that they start with a letterboard and they progress to a keyboard? You know, like how is it just different for every student? Or I mean, can you just talk about sort of what you see?
It is different for every student. I have some students who begin with, you know, Soma begins with 3 split stencils. It's like A to F. They're chunked. The alphabet's chunked into 3 holes so that you have a larger target to point to. Some students start there, some students don't. They begin right away because they have really good hand-eye coordination, good visual attention to the board, and they can move to the letters that they want pretty well. You know, and it depends. Like for some students, like maybe for Jack, it took a while to have that transition. Other students don't take that long. And it's not that you're wedded to one communication method. If you're able to type on multiple things, then if I just have a sheet of paper with it, like I can't find your board and I scribble out the alphabet, if you can point to spell and everything is pretty much in the same spot it should be, then we can still have communication, even if we don't have a device with us at the moment.
And is that your, there's another question, can every child learn to type, do you think? I mean, is that, you know what I mean? Is that like something we can assume about most kids, or is that something that's not possible for some?
If you don't have the dexterity to type with your fingers, there are other ways you can learn to communicate. But every student I've seen so far at Reach Every Voice, every student that's walked through our doors, even people where I have said, oh my God, we've been doing this for 3 years, where are we? It happens, like that aha moment kind of happens and you're like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? So can every child learn to type? Maybe not typing, but some kind of reliable communication method. Yes, I think we can. Everybody should be aiming for that.
Okay, all right. Let me just see, there's one more question here. Amy, you talked about your journey in presuming competence in Jack. Was Jack's statement of being really smart at the Soma camp, was that, well, it kind of sounded like that was your aha moment.
Mhm.
But was it difficult to convince others, not just Jack's school team, but anyone in his life of his competence? And how do other family members outside your core, group, have they had to be sort of educated about
Mm.
his intelligence, and have they had to be educated about what presumption of competence is?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the Soma experience was definitely our aha, but I would say before that, I neglected to mention it. I watched the Wretches and Jabberers movie, which I sent to Maria a while back. It's a little harder to find now. I mean, it's old.
I think
wanna
you can find it on public library sites. I remember streaming it from like Montgomery County Public Libraries, I think has it.
Okay, that was a powerful movie for me. Oh, and Maria's saying you can find it on Vimeo, however you pronounce that. Yeah, it's that was my game changer because I watched these two adult men who were nonverbal autistics, and they typed, and I just was in awe and wept through the entire film, and that got me investigating Soma, and that started our ball rolling. It has been difficult, particularly in the school setting. And I'm not pointing fingers, but I think a lot of special educators are trained a certain way, and this kind of isn't in their repertoire, similar to what Lisa was saying. So, they sort of have this set idea of how they're going to teach my child, and they're not very open. So we always have to kind of start over with a new school team and explain where Jack is, and that he is very smart and he's very capable, but he is overwhelmed by his body, and his body dictates him most days. So it still is a struggle to this day, getting people to presume his competence. But I will say my daughters are fierce advocates for their brother, even though he's 250 pounds and 5'11". His sister would fight anyone who gave him a bad look or used the R word or anything derogatory toward him. She would be all over them. So she's a pretty great advocate for him. So we're still teaching the world about autism and the presumption of competence.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
I want to boost Jack's and some of his fellow typers' voices. We have a blog on our website, and it is largely it's not me, but it's all of our students who spell and type to communicate. So some of it is Jack's like creative writing. There's opinion pieces. There are people writing about their advocacy for education, and Tara at Neuroclastic has been a really good microphone for them too, kind of boosting our signal by sharing these things on Neuroclastic or inviting our students to become contributors. So if you're looking for more things in Jack's words or in the other words of some of the real boys and girls, you should check out our blog on our site.
Awesome.
Yes, Tara, you can have everybody. You're not just you've got a much bigger microphone.
I think we have one last question before we run out of time here. Someone asked the question, I think probably Lisa, this might be directed to you. In thinking about programming like a device, is it best to use the alphabet, the natural, like you were talking about, is it just chunks of alphabet, or to maybe start out with the QWERTY keyboard as the visual? Can you talk a little bit about why you would do one or the other, or sort of?
I kind of start with the ABC board with just about everybody because you know the order of the alphabet, right? We might know where to move our fingers to type our favorite YouTube site on a keyboard, but that doesn't necessarily mean we know the layout and we can picture in our heads like where's the Q, where's the R, right? If I put that in front of you, but if you think about the alphabet, it comes kind of in a natural progression. And I have found that after students gain some competence with their pointing to letters on a board successfully, slowly, they have the ability to do words or choices and things like that. If they get stuck in a motor loop, like they keep spelling the same thing again and again and again, if I switch to a QWERTY board, even though we don't use it, they can kind of unstick themselves. So that ends up being how I work on most transitions, is kind of in a natural way where we just kind of slip it in and you go, oh, aha, I didn't realize I was even doing that. But yes, I do. I usually start with an ABC board.
Gotcha. All right, I think we are pretty much out of time. Just a reminder to everybody, we are recording this. So You can find it on our website, and you can refer other people to it. I know I'm definitely going to be asking some folks to take a look at what everybody has said. And before I turn it over to Maria, to take us out, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Maria. This is going to be her last webinar with us. She is moving on to a fellowship with Disability Rights Maryland. And I just wanted to say publicly how much she has shaped and changed the X-Minds trajectory regarding non-speaking students and the whole issue of presuming competence. Before she came onto our board, it was not something that we were focusing on at all. And so I just want to thank you, Maria, for really pushing that, because it is right where we need to be. I wish we would have gotten there earlier, and I'm glad you were there to push us in this direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. And actually, I have to thank Hannah and other kids like Elisa Valado, or young adults, I should say, and Jack Allnut and Gordy. They're the ones who taught me, and I'm just passing the message along. So thank you to them. Well, this has just been an amazing evening, and I really, I feel like I learn so much every time we talk about presuming competence, and I hope everyone feels the same. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for your participation this evening, and a special thank you to our panelists for this incredibly insightful discussion. Your dedication to promoting greater understanding of the extraordinary autistic community is inspiring to us all. We hope to see you back for our next X-Minds panel event on February 24th. Our speakers will, the name of the event is Understanding Behavior, What are autistic children communicating? Our speakers will be parent coach and psychologist Sarah Wayland and autistic self-advocate and occupational therapist Kim Clary. Thank you again, everyone, and good night.